Hello everybody. We're going to be breaking down this crash video right here. This crash video includes this guy who is already going 80 plus miles per hour down a road like this. So he's basically asking to get hurt, and I will name all of the mistakes he does wrong later. So first, let's just establish what car he's driving. Well, first we know it's a Honda. We can tell by this. VTEC. It also sounds like a Honda. This car also sounds NA. So this appears to be an NSX from the interior, which means that it could be rear wheel drive. I'm not quite sure if NSXs were front wheel drive or rear wheel drive. Actually, yeah, no, they're rear wheel drive. So this car is rear wheel drive. That probably will matter when we eventually get to how he's driving and the result of his driving. Let's just look through this video and see what he's doing wrong. So we can already tell what mistake number one is. He's driving like an idiot. Okay, he's going 90 miles per hour. We can tell by the needle if 20, 40, 60, 80, 100, he's going 90. Going 90 down a hill can be dangerous, first of all, because even if you're not pressing on the gas, gravity is also making you accelerate a little bit. And what's happening is you're accelerating very fast, and it could lead to understeer. Although he luckily doesn't understand this video. Although I don't know if I'll say luckily, because he does experience a worse type of traction loss, which we will see later on what that is. But let's just see what he's doing bad so far. So that's mistake number one, is driving like an idiot. Also, for some reason, this doesn't contribute to his crash, but he's trying to undertake this guy during a merge. It's definitely dangerous to undertake during a merge, It's very unsafe. What he's doing. You can see the lane's ending and he's doing this. That's dangerous. He didn't have much time. We will also see one other problem in the next 10 seconds. That is the problem. Now, you may be saying, like, well, what's the problem? There's snow patches there, but it's not on the ground. Those snow patches means that it's cold. And when it's cold, you'll have less grip with the ground because it's cold. And so that's mistake number two. Mistake number one, he's driving like an idiot. Mistake number two, he's driving like an idiot in very cold weather. Now, this isn't like 40 plus degree weather. Like, this has to be mid 30 degree weather. This has to be in the winter. That he's driving like this, like horrible. But let's just see his other mistake that leads to his eventual limit of traction being broken. pedals, that poor pedal use will eventually lead to his traction loss. But just remember, mistake number 3 is he actually are we on mistake number 3 or are we on mistake number 4? Well, anyways, another mistake that he's doing, he doesn't have pedal control. Like, he doesn't have, yeah, he doesn't have pedal control. He probably doesn't understand how weight balance works right now, because, you know, the intelligent person in this situation who understands how pedal use works, an intelligent person like that wouldn't be driving like this in the first place, right? Let's just continue through. That does look to be a police officer, which is pretty sketchy that he's doing this near a law enforcement. Here is where we get to the crash. So let's just rewind a little bit just to see how the crash is. That wasn't really a crash, but it was traction loss. So, what happened there? Well, we could pretty easily see what happened. Let's just rewind the footage a little bit. So let's do this slower, just so you guys can see what is actually wrong. Right, so right now he's on the throttle. So let's just establish what the car does when we're on the throttle. So let's say this is the car. When you're on throttle, I know this is exaggerated, but your car is kind of like this, right? So remember, if you ever go boating, you know that when you're boating, the front end of the boat is very high up and the back end is very close to the ground, so your back tires have more grip. This doesn't contribute to the crash, and being on the throttle doesn't contribute to the crash. In fact, the inverse contributes to it. You can see he puts a 4th brake pressure, right? A 4th. And let's just establish what braking does. So we've established that throttle raises the front end. Now, braking does the inverse. So this is an exaggerated model of what braking does to your car. The back end has no grip. This is the ground. The back end has no grip. Meaning, very slight external forces will cause the back end to swing, right? Very little forces. Let's say this is force 1. Very little external forces, force 2. You're always having forces applied to the sides of your car. It's just you have grip on the ground. They don't cause you to lose grip because they're very slight forces. But when your back tires have no grip, these forces will cause it to swing out. And an example of one of the forces that caused it to swing out when it had no traction was the steering force, right? Now, when you steer, it applies a sideways force. But that sideways force also gets applied on the rear tires, causing the rear end of the car to quite literally swing out in any which direction. It's kind of like if you have like, you know, an apple hanging from a tree and you hit it, it swings around because there's no friction, right? It can swing around. It's the same with this. The back end can swing around because it has no grip. So if we see he's going over 60 miles per hour and he's on the road, he realizes that corner is sharp. We can tell by the place where these lines meet. He's like, this corner is pretty sharp for a 60 mile per hour speed. And then he slows and he puts fourth brake pressure, which does this to the suspension. And because it does that to the suspension, it causes him to oversteer. We can tell. And he's steering. So because he's steering while he's braking, remember, steering applies a sideways force on, let's say he's steering to the right. So this is his car. If he's steering to the right, it applies a sideways force on the car, on the right side. But inversely, it applies another sideways force here. Well, it actually, okay, so it doesn't quite literally apply a sideways force here, although it does kind of emulate that idea of applying a sideways force there. What it's doing is it applies a sideways force here, which causes it to turn, right, like it's supposed to. But because the rear tires have no grip, they stay in place. They stay the same place that they were earlier, right? Meaning the back end swings out. The back end swings out because the back end never had traction when you were turning. The front end had traction when you were turning, meaning the front end is going where you wanted it to go. But the back end never had traction, which means it's going to stay the same place it was before you even started turning, leading to that swing out, which, you know, it's not necessarily the front end that was swinging, it was the back end. Sorry, it's not the back end that was swinging, it was the front end. It was the front end moving and the back end not moving that caused it. So, partially because of that. And we can see his brake usage during the corner, because he could have saved this. There's a chance that he could have corrected the car. It would have been really hard because he's correcting during the corner, so he could have still, ended up in the other lane, but we could see that he didn't correct properly. Let's see. Once he loses traction by oversteering, we see he's pressing the brake even more. We can see this is brake pressure when slowing down, and then this is brake pressure when oversteering. You can see his foot is even more into the pedal. This is a natural human response. Whenever you lose grip, you just want to slam on the brakes. Not what you want to do when you're oversteering. Now, when you're understeering, you do want to either let go of the, if you're on the throttle, let go of the throttle. And if that doesn't help you, then apply a little bit of brake pressure. When you're oversteering, you don't want to push the brake even more, because, as we established, this is oversteer when the back end has no traction. Now, when you press the brakes even more, then it's even more like that. And then, well, this is an exaggeration. This is highly exaggerated, but we can tell that there's even less grip on the back tires, which basically means, he's toast. Like, he clearly has not demonstrated proper pedal control, because he does freak out. He's pressing the brake. He's trying to correct the steering. Then he applies the pedal form, and then he brakes. He's like, so he's panicking. He doesn't know which pedal to use. He's switching back and forth between the brake in the throttle. That's another mistake. So, mistake number one, he's driving like an idiot. Mistake number two, he's driving like an idiot in cold weather. Mistake number three is brake pressure during a corner. Now, mistake number four is improper correction. Now, you can technically brake during a corner. It's called trail braking. Well, the proper way to brake during a corner is called trail braking. What he did was not trail braking. It was just poor driving skill. But, yeah, he doesn't know how to trail brake. It doesn't appear that he was trying to trail brake. It appears that he realized, I'm going 60 plus. Maybe I should brake because there's a corner there. And then he brakes too late. He could have braked on the straightaway and not have gotten in this situation at all. But he didn't because, he's overconfident in his car. We can tell that he's overconfident in his car. He thinks his car is just gonna tear up these rows without losing a tiny bit of traction. That's not at all how driving works. You have to assume, whenever you're driving, one thing that I like to think about is you have to assume you're driving on bald tires. You have to have that kind of skill. Assume you're driving on bald tires. Assume you're driving on a car that has horrible traction. That doesn't mean that you have to, if you're on a track, that you have to drive slow. That just means that you have to assume that so that you have the proper technique, right? The proper technique. When you're in a corner, you want to roll into the throttle, right? You don't want to just jam on the throttle. That could lead to severe understeer, or depending on the drive configuration of your car, if you abruptly full throttle, it could even lead to oversteer because you're just depending on the kind of diff you have and depending on the drive configuration. So now what should he have done during the corner to correct? Well, obviously, when you're correcting oversteer, right? Let's say you're oversteering in this direction, and this is the steering wheel, right? Now, let's say that it's to the right. You want to steer to the left a little bit because that is where the back end is. The back end is on the left side, right? Now, because the back end is on the left side, you want to turn to the left a little bit to straighten the car. Why do you want to do this? Well, you want to do this because the back end kind of stayed a little bit in its place because it didn't turn with the car, right? Because the front tires are the turning tires, right? And because if they have more grip, that means that they're the ones turning. But the rear tires aren't really turning in the same direction because they have no grip. So they're kind of staying in place a little bit, and maybe swinging a little bit in the opposite direction just a bit. But what that means is you want to take advantage of the fact that these tires are turning. You want to take advantage of that, which means you want to turn left. Try to make the back tires and the rear tires completely parallel with each other. And if you make them parallel and, apply a little bit of throttle, then it'll help you. You want to apply a little bit of throttle progressively, not that much, but a little bit, because that will get a little bit more grip on the back ones. And you want to steer in the opposite direction, in the same place that your back tires are, right? So if your back tires are here, you want to steer a little bit to the left. And then if that causes your car to swing even more to this direction, right? Then you want to do the opposite. Then you want to repeat the step, but in opposite. You want to steer progressively. Progressively is the key. To the right. And then it'll probably keep, ping-ponging around. It'll keep bouncing between left and right until it eventually straightens out. Right? And it won't ping-pong as much if you roll into the throttle. It'll help for sure if you roll into the throttle. Not so much. You don't want to roll into like full throttle. You want to have a little bit of throttle. That will cause the back end of the car to have a little bit more grip. Regaining traction. Now what did this guy kept pressing on the brake during the corner? I mean, he kept extending it. So what that did is it made it virtually impossible for him to regain traction. Virtually impossible. Because he is correcting with the steering wheel. Well, not virtually impossible, but essentially impossible to regain traction and still sort of end up in the same place that he wanted to be, because he was correcting, he had some idea in that situation. He did correct too much, as you can tell, because watch what happens. He turns it. He turned it a little bit too much to the left, because you could tell, because he turned it so much that you could actually hear the front tires squealing a little bit. That's the front tires and the back tires. So because he steered so much, he's losing grip on everything. He's correcting too much. You could tell he loves the steering wheel. That's a hard correction. Like he could have. What the best thing to do is to slowly correct more and more to the other direction. And if that's not working, you apply a little bit more, and then if that causes your car to go back to the other direction, then you progressively go to that direction. You don't want to be yanking it, trying to turn as much as you possibly can in the other direction. That will, cause you to lose grip, too much grip, and that'll also cause you, the back end, to swing the other direction with such force that it'll eventually lead to you completely spinning out, because you're correcting so much that it causes the back end to swing all the way, and once the back end swings to the point of here, then there's no saving it. It spins out. You're done. But yeah, what he could have done is he could have rolled into the throttle a little bit. He could have been more progressive with his corrections, and he totally could have saved it. So that's another mistake. So tallying up all his mistakes, he made a lot of mistakes here. A lot of mistakes. Namely, the mistakes that he made were driving like an idiot. He's even driving like an idiot with a passenger. He's also driving too fast for cold weather. I mean, it's cold weather. It's easier to lose traction. Same with if it's too hot, it's easy to lose traction. It needs to be just right, the Goldilocks. Also, he does not have pedal control. He braked, which caused the front end to load and unload the back end, which caused oversteer during that corner. He braked even more when he tried correcting oversteer, which led to him basically, it's impossible to correct your car when you're braking even more, because braking was what caused the oversteer in the first place, and you're braking even more. That causes you to oversteer even more, and you just can't save it at that point. And he didn't correct very well. He did make a response video about how he was an idiot in this back then, and he did say, he felt bad about endangering his girlfriend, which is now his wife, and he did note that he was a novice driver, which we can obviously tell based on his driving skill. And yeah, so I do commend him for admitting his mistake, that he was driving too fast, and just driving like an absolute idiot. But that pretty much concludes it. If you enjoyed it, then great. If you didn't, I'm sorry. Hopefully I'll make better ones in the future.